Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tracing the absolutely jaw-dropping evolution of a massive modern phenomenon. We are talking about an incredibly humble origin story here. If you've ever flown on a commercial jet, you are intimately familiar with the end result of the story we're about to explore. But the beginning of that story, it is something else entirely. Let's kick things off with a pretty massive number. As of their centennial celebration in 2016, the Boeing company was a colossal multinational corporation employing roughly 160,000 people across the United States and in more than 65 countries worldwide. And just to put that kind of scale into perspective, in the year 2015 alone, they brought in a staggering $96 billion in annual revenue as America's biggest manufacturing exporter. So on one end, you have this modern mega corporation responsible for Apollo rockets, the International Space Station, and those iconic 747 jumbo jets. But rewind back to 1916. The exact same enterprise was literally just a handful of guys piecing together wood, wire, and linen seaplanes inside a tiny Seattle boathouse. We're basically taking this massive oak tree of modern aerospace and shrinking our view all the way down to a tiny wooden acorn. Section 1. The Lumberman's Aviation Dream. William Boeing's unlikely start. So William Edward Boeing, born in 1881, he followed his dad right into the lumber and ore industry. And honestly, business was booming. Which begs the question, why did a highly successful lumber tycoon suddenly decide he wanted to build airplanes? You'd probably assume he had some sort of grand prophetic vision for the future of global commercial transport, right? Well, the reality is wonderfully relatable and actually purely accidental. It's wild to think about, but impatience literally birthed an empire here. Picture this, it's 1910. Boeing is at an aviation meet, walking from plane to plane, basically begging pilots for a quick joyride. And every single one of them turns him down. No way! But, he had the wealth to pursue this crazy new obsession. So he goes to flying school, buys a seaplane from aviation pioneer Glenn Martin, brings it back to Seattle, and promptly crashes it during a test flight. And when they told him it would take months for replacement parts to show up, he got so unbelievably frustrated waiting that he just decided, you know what, I'll build my own plane. Section 2. Building the B&W Seaplane. Overcoming early turbulence. Now, he couldn't do it alone, so Boeing roped in his good friend, a U.S. Navy officer and engineer named George Conrad Westervelt. And just look at how fast this all happens. 1910, Boeing sees his very first airplane. Fast forward to June 15, 1916, and he is actually piloting their very first aircraft, the B&W Seaplane, named after Boeing and Westervelt, right over Seattle's Lake Union. Literally 1 month later, he officially incorporates the business as Pacific Aero Products Company. And by April 1917, they snag a major military contract and rename it the Boeing Airplane Company. That is a wildly rapid, kind of chaotic evolution from aviation hobbyist to official government contractor in just a few short years. To really ground this history in reality, you have to check out the wonderfully humble specs of that very first aircraft, the B&W Seaplane, or the Model 1. It maxed out at a whopping 75 miles per hour. It weighed about 2,100 pounds empty, had a range of 320 miles, and was powered by a 125 horsepower Hall-Scott engine. Oh, and the absolute best part? The airframe was primarily made of spruce wood that came directly from Boeing's own lumber supply. Talk about vertical integration. But here's the catch. It almost didn't happen. Navy Lieutenant Westervelt gets abruptly transferred to the East Coast before the plane is even finished. This is one of those massive what-if moments in history. It could have ended the whole company right then and there. But Boeing pivots. He goes out and hires Wang Chu, a Chinese-born, fresh aeronautical engineering grad straight out of MIT. Bringing Wang Chu into the fold turned out to be the exact solution they needed to finish that aircraft and push the company forward into becoming a legitimate manufacturer. Section 3. Inside the Red Barn, Boeing's first factory. So get this. The world's largest aerospace company literally started its manufacturing life in a balloon frame building that was originally meant for a boat. Officially known as Building Number 105, William Boeing bought this structure in 1910 just to have a place to build his personal yacht. But as his attention drifted from the sea up to the sky, he completely converted this red barn into his company's very first engineering offices and manufacturing plant. And since there were absolutely no dedicated aerospace assembly lines back in 1916, they had to rely entirely on local artisans. They hired carpenters and cabinet makers to carve and piece together the spruce wood frame. Then they brought in local seamstresses to literally sew the linen skin covering the wings, and for the pontoons that let the plane land on water, they recruited shipwrights straight from the Seattle docks. The whole shebang was just a massive, completely local, artisanal effort. Now, despite all that incredibly hard work from those local tradespeople, the U.S. Navy actually rejected the first B&W planes. Ouch, right? But rejection didn't stop Boeing. He just looked outward. He ended up selling those first two aircraft all the way to the New Zealand Flying School. That became the company's very first international sale. And those so-called rejected planes, well, they went on to set a local altitude record of 6,500 feet, and by 1919, they were flying New Zealand's very first official airmail service. Talk about ultimate proof of concept. Section 4. A Global Aerospace Empire. 100 Years of World-Changing Achievement. Let's zoom out a bit. Over the following decades, engineers working out of that exact same red barn eventually designed the famous B-17 and B-29 bombers, absolutely instrumental for the Allies in World War II. Then they completely revolutionized commercial travel with the 707, the very first successful commercial jetliner. And of course, that was followed by the incredibly iconic 747 jumbo jet. But they didn't even stop at the atmosphere. This same company went on to manufacture Saturn and Delta rockets, supporting the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo space missions, and eventually the International Space Station. I mean, they literally went from sewing linen wings to engineering orbital space habitats. Just incredible. There's this quote I absolutely love from their 2016 centennial celebration, given by then CEO Dennis Muhlenberg. He said, "The innovative spirit of our founder, Bill Boeing, who 100 years ago today dedicated this company to building something better, is alive in the generations of our people who continue to deliver products and services that matter." It's perfect, right? It just beautifully connects that impatient, driven, do-it-yourself spirit of a lumberman back in 1916 to a massive modern workforce of 160,000 people. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. After leaping from a humble wood and canvas seaplane built by local carpenters all the way to the International Space Station in just a single century, what boundaries of Earth and space is this company going to push in its second century? Seriously, if they manage to pull all of this off starting from a literal boathouse, what impossible leaps in flight are waiting for us next? Thank you so much for joining me to trace this fascinating history. Keep wondering, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.